This podcast is brought to you by New Life Ministries.
Welcome to the Every Man's Battle podcast. I'm your host, JJ West. On this podcast, you will hear honest conversation and encouragement for living a life of sexual integrity. Let's get to today's episode. Welcome back to the Every Man's Battle podcast. I am your host, JJ West. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in Florida. I get to work with individuals and couples walking through sexual integrity issues and the restoration process that follows. I get to speak at the Every Man's Battle Intensive as well as the Intimacy and Marriage Workshop for New Life Ministries. And I am thrilled to be here today with Doug Barnes. Hey, Doug.
Hi, JJ. How you doing today?
Man, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be with you, and I'm excited to talk on helping clergy understand the betrayal and recovery process. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I've been a counselor for going on almost 30 years now. I get the privilege and honor of serving in the small group sessions at Every Man's Battle and some of the other intensives that we do for New Life. My practice is mainly couples and men who are struggling with any type of sexual integrity issue, any kind of struggle in their marriages. And it's just my honor and privilege to get to do this work. As I've said before, down in the trenches. I mean, this is where I like to be, just because that's where a lot of the real good work happens. And so I'm just thrilled to be here and excited about today talking about the clergy.
Absolutely. Man, it's going to be a great show. We hope that it's informative. Let me say at the outset that as you're listening today, maybe you're not in a professional ministry role. Maybe you're not clergy. You don't serve on a church staff, but you know somebody who does. And this may be an episode that it would be really important to pass on to someone who is in full-time ministry, or perhaps someone who is training to become a full-time minister, maybe someone who's attending seminary or Bible college or something along those lines. I would be thrilled if you would pass this on to those individuals in your life who are in ministry roles so that they can have some of this information, hopefully as well be a resource to finding other good resources that will help them. And Doug and I both want to say at the outset, we know lots of people who are in full-time ministry who are really solid, God-loving, people-loving. They provide excellent counsel. They understand their own limitations. And we also know, because I've been on church staffs. I did campus ministry for 9 years. I know the challenges of being in full-time ministry. I know that there is a lot on your plate all the time. You're having to wear many different hats all the time. And so we just want to say at the outset, we know lots and lots of people who are in the roles of full-time ministry who do an excellent job, who provide great counsel, and know their own limitations and know when to refer out. However, not to negate that, okay, that's true. That's bold type headline news. That's true.
Yeah.
However, we also have heard some of the horror stories from clients who had someone in a ministry role give them really bad advice, especially in the areas of sexual integrity and recovery. And so what we want to do today is help you, if you are in one of these roles, help you avoid some of those mistakes down the road, or hopefully if you have already made some of those mistakes, ways to correct some of those mistakes. And if you happen to be in the audience and you have been someone who has been given some of this bad advice, that you're not alone in that, and there's healing and recovery for that. So is that fair? I hope that's fair.
Yes, of course. I think that sometimes we, and I hate to be in a cliche, but it's throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I got this counsel, advice, whatever we want to call it. I talked to someone, they gave me bad advice. Therefore, I'm lumping everybody in that category of now I'm not going to ever get that. And so I'm going to isolate myself, and I'm going to just read this book and just go to this place, and I'm never going to, talk to anyone again. That's not true, because we're all human, and not everyone, and you stated it, JJ, not everyone knows to exercise their own limitations, because some of us are just not equipped to work with certain folks. And really, some of us who's good, even good intentions can still hurt. But let's not put everybody in the same category. Like, I'm never going to church again because they gave me bad advice.
Right.
Not everybody is that way, right? And I don't mean that in an ugly way, but that's the truth. We need to do our research, and that's what I tell anybody who comes to me. It's like, do your research, ask them questions. Here's some questions to ask, and so on and so on. So it can be difficult sometimes, especially, and you probably had these in your practice too. Those folks that have had some not so good advice walking in, and it's almost like they're walking in, taking a half a step at a time, going, am I safe here? Right? Is
Right. They've got their shields up for sure.
Right. Exactly. The defenses are high, and sometimes we have to do harder work to just get them to exhale and say, you know what, this is a safe place.
Yes.
Safe place. Yes. We get this.
Right.
So I know that's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually brings, I kind of envision what we're doing today as, providing some helpful information, some guidelines, obviously, for clergy to help couples navigating, a very difficult and painful journey, no doubt, but kind of giving some do's and don'ts. Hey, here, try and remember to do some of these things, and remember to avoid some of these don'ts. So it kind of brings up the first do on my list, which is, before I offer any advice, before I offer any, here's what you need to do to heal, let me just start by expressing compassion. Let me just, it seems so obvious that I feel silly even saying it, because again, we know so many people in ministry who would say, of course, I'm going to offer compassion. But there are some who are so keyed in on what's true. What does the Bible say? Well, you better do this. And they forget that Jesus was full of compassion. They forget that, he shared the truth in love. That Romans 12:15 tells us to mourn with those who mourn. So we want to start with, before we ever offer advice, before we ever offer correction, we start with compassion.
Well, okay, so explain a little bit what that compassion might look like.
For me, it starts with, first and foremost, I'm so sorry that you're walking through this. I'm so sorry that you're experiencing this pain. And God's heart is grieving with and for you as well. I'm saddened by what you're carrying. Not I'm saddened by what you did. I'm angry with you. I'm disappointed in you. No, I'm hurting with you. This is a heavy burden to carry, right? So I start with that compassion. I start with, this is a hard place to be, and I see you. And I understand as best I can, having not maybe walked through it myself, but I understand that this is a heavy load, and you're trying to bear it as best you can.
Right. Good. Yeah. And that really speaks to, sometimes we good intentioned folks, we don't know what to say. Sometimes we don't. Right? Sometimes we don't have the words, and sometimes when I say the words, they come out sideways, and sometimes that's not what I mean, and so on. Again, it's walking with someone who's been doing this a while, to maybe get some of those words that can exemplify the true compassion I feel. Maybe writing it down and practicing it once or twice, so that we can can really say, hey, if somebody heard this, would they feel my heart? Would they really hear that my
Yes.
heart is broken for their broken heart?
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that idea of practicing ahead of time. Like sit down with someone who knows you well and say, "Hey, if I were to say this, right? Let me say
Right.
this. How does that communicate my compassion for you? Does that communicate that my heart is broken for your broken heart?"
Right.
I love that. And I would also add to that idea, it's okay to say I don't know.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
okay in the moment to
Limitations.
say,
Know my limitations.
I don't know what to say. I don't know how to adequately express how sad I am or how brokenhearted I am for you, but I want you to know that I am.
Right. Right.
It's
And
yeah,
and to
abs-
really and to really get into, do I understand what sad and brokenhearted for you means?
hmm hmm
Do I really get that
right.
internally for me? Right.
Yes.
Again, we're not talking about a stock quote or a box score. This
hmm
is it's not about the data. It's the process. Can I get into that trench with them?
hmm
Again, maybe not knowing, not having the right perfect words, but that's okay. But that's
hmm
okay. Is
hmm
my heart coming through? And I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah. And to that point, if you are someone in ministry who finds it difficult to connect emotionally with others, to really understand what it is that they're feeling, and probably because it's hard for you to connect to your own emotions. If that's the case, I want to encourage you. There's a book by Mike Mason called Practicing the Presence of People. Highly recommend that you pick a copy of that book up to help you learn how to be with others in a real way and connect with what they're going through, what they're feeling. Which
Mm.
actually brings me to my next do, which is as someone is sharing, if they're sharing their story of betrayal, whether they're the one who had been betrayed or sharing that they have been the one who was betraying, listen for the primary emotion. What's the because so often it's presented with anger. Anger is that secondary emotion, right? It's the
Mhm.
if we use the cross section of the earth, remember back in elementary school they showed the you had the core, and then you had the magma layer, and then you had the crust or the mantle, right? So imagine emotions that way, right? And there are core emotions, primary emotions at the core, and then you've got these secondary emotions in that magma layer. Well, anger is a secondary emotion. And so often what happens is anger is the volcanic eruption that breaks through the surface, and that's what we see is people being angry. I can't believe he did this, and my life is ruined, and he's been lying
Yeah.
all these years, and right, and there's all this anger. Okay,
Mhm.
rather than trying to jump in and correct the anger, that's not Christ-like for you to be angry. You stop that. Instead, pause and drill down past the anger to what's the primary emotion underneath that anger that's fueling the anger. And most of the
Right.
time, that's going to be things like fear, pain, grief, shame. That's the stuff that's fueling the anger. And so listen for that primary emotion. Don't just react to the secondary emotion.
Right. And some of this, and that's very well said. Right. Right. Because we know that's not helpful. Shutting someone down, especially when they're exhibiting that anger, that
Yeah.
is not helpful. It is never helpful.
Yeah.
So, so being able to number one, really listen, because the person who is expressing that, they
Mhm.
may not understand that there's an emotion or there are emotions underneath that either. And
Mhm.
so some of this is really being very delicate and very sensitive to the energy that's there with them,
Mhm.
because it can just as easily turn around and come right at you
Mhm.
about shutting them down or dismissing it or turning it in a different
Mhm.
way or saying you're not supposed to, and on and on.
Mhm.
And so we don't want that to happen either.
Mhm.
But it's recognizing, hey, can we get down a little bit below? So I know you're angry. What are you experiencing on the inside? Go inside and see what's there. And
Yes.
sometimes they'll know, sometimes they won't. I mean, we all grow up in the same households, right? So sometimes we weren't we weren't taught how to really identify and be aware and relate our emotions to others. It's hard.
Yes. You're absolutely right. Sometimes I'm expressing anger and someone else will tell me, "Hey, you can't do that." Sometimes I do that to myself because I did grow up in a family where I was told over and over again, "You're not allowed to be angry, you're not allowed to be angry." And so as soon as I feel anger, ooh, shut that down. Not allowed to be
Right.
angry. And I don't myself sit with the anger long enough to find out what's underneath it. And so to create that space, if we who are in the helping professions, whether we're licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists, or we are clergy in a helping profession, in a helping way, to be able to sit with that anger long enough, let them sit with that anger long enough so that they can feel what's underneath it. They can identify what's underneath it. So important.
Yeah, great point. Let me just make one other point here. Um, and you talk about this at the intensive. Sometimes, especially by the time they get into our offices, there's already a grieving going on.
Mm.
But it doesn't look like grieving when it's intense and it's loud and it's forceful and it's dangerous. It doesn't look like grieving, but we need to be aware that sometimes, especially from a betrayed spouse, they can already be in that grieving process. And so grief looks differently at different times in different ways to different people. And so being aware that, hey, this could be somewhere in her or his grieving process that's appropriate. That's a very
Yes.
appropriate expression of where they are.
Right.
And so just to be sensitive to that piece too, that it's not just about the emotion, because for some folks, emotion is a dirty word. But when we talk about grief, right? But you know that, right?
I
But
do
when we talk
indeed.
about grief is a different animal. Grief is hard to see and recognize, and it's hard to just be in the middle of, because a lot of times it does not look like the grief that we want it to look like. So I just wanted to bring that out too, because sometimes that gets mixed in with those emotions, and it can be very confusing sometimes.
It's such a good point, Doug. And it reminds me of when we had Laura on the show and she was talking about if you lost a child,
Yes.
you wouldn't be like, well, we're not talking about that anymore. So in the same way, if you're a clergy and a couple came in and they were talking about they had just lost a child and they were expressing anger. How could God do this? You wouldn't if you were loving and kind, you wouldn't say, well, you stop that. You're not allowed to be angry. Don't be mad at God, right? You would be compassionate and you would understand that anger is an expression of their grief. In the same way, yes, there's grieving that happens after betrayal that will oftentimes come out as anger, but it is grieving. And so it's important for us to recognize that. Yeah, such a good point.
Great point.
Such a good point.
Great point.
The Restore Intensive is designed for a woman dealing with a man's sexual addiction issues.
Restore gave me strength. I met up with a group of women that are going through things that they had no control over.
If you've been affected by betrayal, an emotional or physical affair, or pornography, the Restore Intensive will equip you with support and tools to help you through, and it's coming to a city near you. To register to find out more, call 1-800-NEW-LIFE or online at newlife.com.
Okay, another do is to help her communicate her need for boundaries. Again, I'm using her as the replacement or substitute for the betrayed spouse. Okay, which most of the time that's the case. Sometimes it's flipped. Sometimes he's the betrayed spouse and she's the betrayer. But to help the betrayed spouse communicate a need for safe boundaries, that might include things like making sure that both parties get blood tests for STDs, the need for a full disclosure, that's going to be an absolute necessity to move toward recovery. It might be boundaries like he has to cut off communication with the affair partner. And sometimes that might mean I have to change jobs because the affair partner, I work with or work with the affair partner. And so in order to not have communication with them, I've got to change jobs, or we've got to move, or we've got to, whatever. But it's important that the person who has been betrayed has safe space to say, here are the boundaries that I need in order to feel safe enough to even consider restoration.
Yeah, that is so true. And sometimes even emotional safety is a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes maybe even between us as a couple, maybe getting some distance between us. I'll go on record here. I'm not a big fan of out of the house stuff. Like when someone has to go live somewhere else. I mean, there are certain conditions that I won't go into here that I totally agree with. I'm on board. But as a general, especially in this area, as a general rule for me, maybe a spouse needs some safety. So, you have a couch, you have a garage, maybe in a vacant bedroom, the guest bedroom or whatever, where you get some distance for safety until you can really understand what's going on with me, what's going on with them, where did this come from? Let's get some traction under our belt, and to honor that, right? To say, hey, I need this, and to your point, JJ, talking through. There's so many. Oh, your practice may be different, and other people who are listening and watching this may be different too. But for me, sometimes a spouse is not sure what a proper boundary looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
they're not sure. Well, I don't know. Do I kick him out? Do I send him to his mom's? Do I have him go live in a hotel? What do I do? I don't want my marriage to end. Well, and so they've just had this horrible, tragic moment happen in their life, that D-Day bit, and then now what do they do? And so some of that is because, again, our brains are, we're either in our safety brain or our communication, our connection brain, right? And so sometimes in our offices, they're going to be in that safety brain, and they're going to be in their fight, flight, or freeze or submit brain. And so, again, being sensitive to be looking for these subtle cues, because sometimes spouses don't know what boundaries to set. They just don't.
Or they don't think it's appropriate to set boundaries.
Oh,
they're not even sure that they're allowed to do that because, we're married, so I'm not supposed to have any boundaries with this person. No, that's not true. Yeah.
Right.
And so
the courage to set those boundaries.
Yeah. We who are in those roles of helping, whether we're clergy or licensed professional, therapists in some way, it's really important that we come alongside and say, yes, it's not only is it appropriate, it's actually healthy for you to set these boundaries. To make sure
what you're feeling is valid. Yes.
Absolutely.
What you're feeling is valid. It's real. It's not put on. It's not to hurt anybody. This is you being subject to the impact of his behavior or her behavior, as the case may be. So
yeah. And the truth is, there may be boundaries around even our sex life that it's okay, especially if the betrayer was engaging in high risk behaviors. It's completely appropriate for the betrayed spouse to say, I'm not having sex with you right now until I feel safe, right? That has to be a component of a healthy sex life, is that I feel safe to be intimate with you. And so it's important that go ahead.
I was just going to say, explain a little bit what high risk behavior is, just so that everybody's on the same page. Okay,
yeah, so that might be things like having sex with prostitutes, having unprotected sex with multiple partners, things of that nature. That if there was drug use involved, things like that, that would be putting not only the emotional, not only the person's emotional heart at risk, but also their physical body could be
health. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted you to go there to make sure that everybody's thinking the same thing.
Yeah, and so what we don't want to do is go, well, but the Bible says don't withhold from one another. So you betrayed spouse, I don't care. You have to still continue to have sex with your spouse while we're walking through the restoration process. No, that's not healthy. That's not wise, and that's certainly not kind and compassionate for the betrayed spouse. So we want
Right.
to walk through that, and so it brings up that question of a therapeutic separation, as you said, to look at, okay, here are the ground rules, or here are the boundaries, but always, as we've said on previous episodes, it's always with the goal of restoration,
Right.
not to punish.
Right. Coming back together. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And to really engage in something like, oh, I don't know, going to the Everyman's Battle Intensive, right? To really figure out that this whole bit, while sex is involved, I point my sexuality in a different direction. It's not about sex. Well, what is it about? And that's what we talk about at Everyman's Battle.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think this kind of then opens the door to, we've done a lot of the do's. Let's talk about some of the don'ts. What are some of the things that we would say, hey, make sure that you don't do this. If you're a clergy walking a couple through restoration of the betrayal, please make sure you don't do this. First thing on my list would be, don't justify his acting out behavior. Do not do that. Do not, oh, well, because you guys weren't having enough sex, he had to go find sex elsewhere. Bogus.
Right.
Wrong. Not,
right.
not biblical, not helpful, and not healthy. Right. There's nothing that justifies our acting out behavior. There are things that we, as those who've acted out, I'm the chief of sinners here. There are things that I have done to justify. There's things that I've said in my brain to try and justify my behavior, but there is no justification for my acting out behavior. I'm responsible for my sin.
Right. Right. Don't blame her.
Correct.
What did you do that he would go outside of your marriage, or that he would look at porn, or that he would go to a strip joint or a massage parlor, or she to do the same thing, right? Don't blame her. No, we don't do that, especially when they're coming to you broken and probably crying and probably really going, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? We want to keep this marriage together. And so it's on the heels of that justifying, well, if you had had sex as often as he wanted, then this wouldn't have happened. No. It's not about sex.
Most of the time it comes out really subtly. It's not usually like, oh, well, it's your fault that he had multiple affairs on you. Where the way it usually comes out is, well, it takes two to tango, so what's your role in not making the marriage all that it could be, so that he then went to, find stuff elsewhere, right? Like, it's usually a much more subtle approach, but it's still the same damage. If I am, as you said, if I'm blaming the victim, I'm blaming the one who's betrayed. You had some role in this. You did this. You caused this to happen in some way. So we want to avoid that, right? We want to take great pains to say the betrayer is responsible for the betrayal. Full stop.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's a good teaching moment for ownership too.
Right. Exactly. Yes. I'm not going to, yes, I did this, but I only did it because you did this, or you didn't do that, or, I'm not taking full ownership. I did this, full stop. It's my responsibility, full stop. I take responsibility. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Brings us to a second point. We kind of hinted at this already. Don't promote the lie that men need more sex than women, and so the problem will be fixed if you just have more sex with him. Okay, so there's multiple lies here. One, there's a start. The starting lie is that sex is a need, and so if I don't get it, I'm justified to go and get it elsewhere. But then two, there's a lie that men need more sex than women. There's nothing in scripture that backs that up. Now, are there certainly couples where a man may have a higher sex drive, a higher libido than his wife? Yes. And there's some couples where the wife has a higher sex drive. But don't promote the lie that, well, men just need more sex than women. And so if you were just having more sex, then this problem wouldn't go away. Or sometimes it's presented as more exotic sex, more risky sex, sex in public, if you just had sexier lingerie or did certain role play games or whatever, right? If you just spiced it up in some way, then he wouldn't need to go elsewhere. Correct?
Right. Correct. No question, no argument. And by the way, we were involved in a podcast with a certain Mark Cameron who gives an incredible explanation of this particular point. The differences between men and women when it comes to sex. And I can't wait for the people who are listening and watching now to hit on that one and play that one all the way through, because that will take their understanding to a completely different level.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're not naive to say there's no differences. We're not saying that. We're saying we don't use the fact that there are differences to then justify inappropriate,
right.
sinful behavior, right? Yeah, without a doubt.
Going outside of God's will and design. Yes. Mm-hmm. Because he does have a will and design for our life. Yeah, go ahead.
He does indeed. So my final don't, and it's a big one, is don't ask her to start trusting him immediately. Okay, so again, her being the betrayed spouse, to have her start trusting him, the betrayer, immediately. That is catastrophic. Trust has to be rebuilt over time, a lengthy period of time, and there has to be, as you would say, believable, observable, trust-building behaviors. Right? That has,
right.
But that takes time to observe those trust-building behaviors, and there has to be a whole lot of them lined up in order to start being able to trust again. Even if their forgiveness might happen early on in the process, it might not, but it might happen early on in the process. But I don't think restoration of trust happens early on in the process in a healthy way. It has to take time.
Right. And that goes back to the concept that we did in another podcast about forgiving and forgetting. Mm-hmm. She can get to a place, or the betrayed can get to a place of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that we don't talk about it anymore. We don't bring it up. There's not pain wrapped around it. There are not triggers wrapped around it. And so, you said 2/3 of that good recovery equation, right? Time plus believable, observable, trust-building behaviors, plus the sanctification of my character.
Yes.
That's what makes good recovery. And so what we're talking about today are some of the things that are really, really good in that, and some things that we really want to try to stay away from, even though some things are socially or culturally acceptable. Mm-hmm. So really, trust built, it just takes time. Time does not heal all wounds, right. And it just takes time to establish trust again. And that's our job as the betrayers. It is our job to build that trust back, and it just takes time. That's where we get into the fruit of the Spirit again, like you talked about, patience and love and tenderness, long suffering. We have a big job ahead of us, but it's all doable. It's all very doable.
Absolutely. So give me an example, maybe one that you've heard of someone asking the betrayed spouse to start trusting immediately or too soon. What would that look like? I mean, they're probably not going to use those words. What would give me an example of that if you can think of one?
Well, we talked about this, and we've come to the conclusion that we just want to move on. I've stopped the behavior. I've cut the ties with the affair partner. I've canceled all of my trips. I'm canceled the credit cards for that account. I'm not going back there, and I'm just so tired of being caught in that I'm just not going to do that anymore. And the problem was really us, and the fact that we weren't communicating. We'd grown apart, and we're going to work on now growing back together. And we have a vacation schedule for next week, and we can't wait to go to Monte Carlo and spend 4 days there, and go to Italy from there, and we're just going to connect, and we'll be good. How was that?
Yeah, that was good. No, absolutely. Yeah, there's that can't we just put this behind us?
Yeah.
Can't we just move on? Right. And sometimes that is reinforced or encouraged by someone in a helping role coming alongside and saying, why can't you trust me? Why can't he go on that trip, that business trip across the country? You're getting in the way of his financial growth and his progress in his company. Or why can't he go and have some fun with the boys and spend his best friend's getting married, he should be able to go to the bachelor party. Why are you standing in his way? As opposed to, no, there has not been enough time and believable, observable behavior and growth in his character, sanctification of his character to warrant that level of trust. Right?
Right. Well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that I need to just shut up and let him do whatever he wants. It's like, wait, no. That's not what we're saying. Don't ever go there. Don't ever go there, because it's our job now to earn that trust back. And It just takes time. And so shaming the wife and blaming her in any way, shape, form, or fashion is it's not her fault. We did what we did. It is not their fault.
Right.
And we need to own that with our heart, not just, okay, yeah, I got caught, so I can't do it anymore. Okay.
My bad.
So I'll stop. Yeah, right, right. Oh.
Yeah. We say this at the intensive, and I think it could be helpful for someone who's in a ministry role, walking alongside a couple. When we first meet, we're neutral. We don't know if we can trust the other person. We spend some time together and we build up enough trust that at some point one says, you want to do the rest of your life? Sure. And then we're married for a while and we build up even more trust. And when you have betrayal, you don't go back to neutral. You become someone I know I cannot trust. So there's this huge gap of trust that has to be rebuilt. And that cannot happen quickly. It certainly can't happen immediately. And so to be able, as a clergy coming alongside a couple that's walking through this, to have in mind that big gap, because you've lied about this, you've hidden this, you've been deceptive, and so you are someone she knows she cannot trust. It's going to take a while for you to get back to being someone that she says, I trust you again. And it's okay for that to take time. She's not being obstinate. She's not trying to punish him. She is rightly guarding her heart against someone who's proven to be untrustworthy until he proves himself to be trustworthy again.
Right. She's trying to make sense of her life that she thought she had, that now she realizes was completely different. And now she's just trying to make sense of it. And sometimes that takes a long time.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, this has been a fun discussion. I hope that it's helpful to the audience. I hope that there's some clergy out there that this at least whets your appetite for how can I grow in my ability to come alongside couples and serve them well as they're walking through this process. Because again, as we said at the beginning, this is a tough process. This is a messy and painful journey. And it's not to be entered into for the faint of heart. So if you're someone who's doing this, who's serving in this role, you're taking on a heroic task. And so don't do it uninformed and ill-equipped. Right? If I'm going into battle, I better put on my armor and I better take my weapons. And so hopefully this gave you a little bit of armor. Maybe told you where the armory is so you can go find some weapons. But hopefully it's been a helpful discussion. We're so glad that you're listening. Once again, I do want to encourage those who are listening. If you've never been to the Everyman's Battle Intensive, would you please call 1-800-NEW-LIFE or go to newlife.com/EMB and learn about the intensive, learn about where it's going to be closest to you next. And if you sign up, you get $100 off your registration simply by being a listener to the podcast. All you have to do is put in the code EMBPOD, EMBPOD in the coupon code, and you'll get $100 off your registration fee. The reason we do that, listen, the reason we continue to encourage people to go, we're not trying to sell it. We're not trying to, we want to get the most people there. We're promoting it because we know how impactful it is. We have seen over and over and over again God show up and set men free from lifetime of addiction. And so if you're struggling, if you're hurting, if you feel like, man, I've tried it all and there's just no hope for me, give us a call. Go to the website, sign up, and open your heart to the possibility of God doing more than you could ask or imagine. Thanks for listening. Doug, thanks for being on once again. Just so good to be with you. Appreciate your wisdom. Appreciate your insight. Thanks again for listening. We hope that you are encouraged, as we are, to walk in integrity. Until we meet again.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is just one of the many ways we can encourage and help you. If you're looking for more help, visit us at newlife.com or call 1-800-NEW-LIFE. Please remember to review, like, and share the podcast as it helps others find us. If you have a comment about this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at embpodcast@newlife.com. See you next week.